It was in this basin that a young soldier of the guard, up to his knees in mud, was pulling with all his might to disengage his wheelbarrow, which was still more muddy than he, but he could not manage it, and all covered with sweat, he swore and cursed like an angry grenadier. All of a sudden, as he happened to lift his eyes, he perceived the emperor, who was passing by the works to go and see his brother Joseph at the camp of the left. Thereupon he began to look at him with a suppliant air and gesture, singing in an almost sentimental tone, "Come, come unto my aid!" His Majesty could not avoid smiling, and he made a sign to the soldier to approach, which the poor devil did, brushing off the mud with such difficulty. "What is your regiment?" "Sire of the First Guard." "Since when have you been a soldier?" "Since you have been emperor, sire." "Diable! That's not long." "Not long enough for me to make you an officer, is it? But conduct yourself well, and I'll have you made a sergeant major. After that, if you like, the cross and the epaulettes on the first battlefield. Are you content?" "Yes, sire." "Major General," continued the emperor, turning to General Berthier, "take the name of this young man, make them give him 300 francs to clean his pantaloons, and have his wheelbarrow mended." And his Majesty went on, amidst the acclamations of the soldiers. At the inner side of the harbor was a wooden bridge, which was called the Pont de Service. The powder magazines were behind it, and they contained immense munitions. After nightfall, no one entered by this bridge without giving the countersign to the second sentinel, for the first one always followed people to pass. But he did not allow them to return. If the person coming on the bridge did not know or had forgotten the countersign, he was sent back by the second sentinel. And the first one placed at the head of the bridge had express orders to run his bayonet through the imprudent one who had entered this dangerous passage without being able to answer the questions of the sentries. These rigorous precautions were rendered necessary by the proximity of the terrible magazines, which a spark might blow up along with the city, the fleet, and the two camps. At night the port was closed with a great chain, which I have spoken of, and the wharves were protected by sentinels placed 15 feet apart. Every quarter of an hour they cried, "Sentinels, take care of yourselves!" And the marines stationed in the topsails would respond to this cry by that of "All's well," pronounced in a drawling and melancholy voice. Nothing more monotonous and sad than this continual murmur, the roll of voices all howling in the same tone, and all the more so because those who uttered these cries did all they knew how to make them as alarming as possible. Women not domiciled in Bologna were forbidden to stay there without a special authorization from the Minister of Police. This measure had been deemed necessary on account of the army. Otherwise, each soldier might fetch a woman to Bologna, and God knows what disorder that would have entailed. And in general, foreigners were not received into the city without the greatest difficulty. In spite of all these precautions, spies from this English fleet were daily introduced into the city. No mercy was shown them when they were discovered, and yet emissaries who landed from no one knew where came to the theater in the evenings and pushed imprudence so far as to write their opinions of the actors and actresses whom they designated by name, and to paste these writings on the walls of the theater. They braved the police in this way. One day 2 little boats covered with tarred canvas were found on the shore, which these gentlemen had probably employed for their excursions. In June 1804, 8 English were arrested, perfectly well dressed in white silk stockings, etc. They had sulfur machines about them designed to set the fleet on fire. They were shot at the end of an hour without any other trial. There were traitors also at Bologna. A schoolmaster, the secret agent of Lords Keith and Melville, was surprised one morning on the cliff of the camp of the right, making telegraphic signals with his arms. Arrested almost at the same moment by the sentries, he wanted to protest his innocence and turn the thing into a joke. But his papers were searched, and a correspondence found among them with the English, which proved his treason to demonstration. He was brought before the Council of War and shot the next day. One evening between 11 o'clock and midnight, a fire ship rigged in the French style, carrying a French flag and having quite the appearance of a gunboat, advanced towards the line of broadside and passed by an unpardonable negligence. The chain of the port was not stretched that night. This fire ship was followed by a second, which blew up and carried with it a shallop. The explosion gave the alarm to the whole fleet. On the instant, lights were burning all around, and thanks to these lights, the beholders, to their inexpressible anxiety, saw the first fire ship advancing between the jetties. 2 or 3 pieces of wood attached with cables luckily arrested its progress. It exploded with such an uproar that all the windows in the city were broken, and a great number of the inhabitants who, for lack of beds, were sleeping on tables, were thrown to the floor and awakened by the fall without comprehending what had happened. In 10 minutes, everybody was afoot. They thought the English were in the harbor. Then there was trouble, a tumult, cries to deafen one. Criers, preceded by drums, were sent around the city who reassured the inhabitants by telling them that the danger was over. The next day, ballads were made on this nocturnal alarm. They were presently in all mouths. I have preserved one which I am going to set down here, and which is the one the soldier sang the longest. Oh no, it's in French. It's really long and it's in French. Okay. This part's in English. It was afternoon. Britain for a long time. All right, looks like there's a translation. Okay, we have a translation. Okay. Britain, for a long time past, imitating the mountain, has threatened the continent with a terrible event. In the shades of mystery, 20 monsters she brought forth. I'm their father, Pitt exclaimed, and no one had a doubt about it. Presently, in darkness deep, Melville launched upon a wave all these monsters newly born, for Bologna intended. Lord Keith, as a good nurse, keep them in his bosom hidden. The tide became propitious, and the infants were let loose. The Frenchman, who always watches towards the uproar, bends his ear, but he does not suspect such rascally neighbors. His tutelary star seems shining in his eyes. The danger itself enlightens him by illuminating him with its fires. This infernal family approaching the flotilla in expiring, it makes a good deal of noise and small effect. The mark it has left of its brilliant valor are a few broken windows and its author's shame. Mr. Pitt, on your shore you affront our courage. Well convinced that never will you see the Frenchman there, you reckon on the distance your vessels and your citizens, but the soldiers of France will make you reckon twice. In our nimble shallops the winds become docile, you retaining in your ports, us conducting to your shores, forcing you to equal weapons. You will see that our soldiers have the infernal machine just at the end of their arms. Another alarm, but of a totally different kind, turned all Bologna upside down in the autumn of 1804. Towards 8 o'clock in the evening, a chimney caught fire on the right of the port. The light of this fire, shining through the mass of the fleet, alarmed the commandant of a post which was on the opposite side. At this epoch, all the vessels were loaded with powder and munitions. The poor commandant lost his head. He screamed, "My lads, the fleet is on fire!" And he had the general alarm beat. This frightful news flew like lightning. In less than half an hour, more than 60,000 men debouched on the quays. The tocsin was sounded in all the churches. The forts discharged alarm guns, and drummers and trumpeters began running through the streets and making an infernal racket. The emperor was at headquarters when this terrible cry, "The fleet is on fire," came to his ears. "It is impossible," he cried at once. Nevertheless, we set off instantly. What a frightful spectacle I witnessed when we entered the city. Women in tears, holding their infants in their arms and running like mad, while uttering shrieks of despair. Men abandoning their houses, carrying away their most precious objects, knocking against and bruising each other in the darkness from all sides. One heard cries of, "Look out for yourself! We are going to skip! We are all ruined!" And maledictions, blasphemies, and lamentations enough to make your hair stand up. His Majesty's aide-de-camp and those of General Soult galloped wherever they could pass, stopping the drummers and asking them, "Why do you beat the general? Who ordered you to beat the general?" "We know nothing about it," was the reply. And the drums kept on beating, and the tumult increasing, and the crowd hurled themselves to the gate, struck with a terror which an instant of reflection would have banished. But fear admits no reflection. Unfortunately, it is true to say, however, that a number of the inhabitants, less timid than the others, remained tranquilly at home, knowing very well that if the fleet were on fire, they would not have had time to make an outcry. These did all in their power to reassure the frightened crowd. Madame F., the very pretty and amiable wife of a clockmaker, was busy in her kitchen preparing supper when a neighbor entered in great alarm and said to her, "Save yourself, madame. You've not a minute to lose." "Why, what's the matter?" "The fleet is afire." "Ah, bah, fly, madame, fly. I tell you the fleet is on fire." And the neighbor took Madame F. by the arm and gave her a strong pull. Madame F. was just then holding a pan in which there were some apple fritters. "Take care! You are making me spoil my fritters," said she, laughing, and a few words between jest and earnest were enough to reassure the poor devil, who ended by deriding himself. At last the tumult quieted down. A profound calm succeeded to this alarm. No explosion had been heard. Was it a false alarm then? Everybody went back home, no longer thinking of fire, but disturbed by another fear. Robbers might well have profited by the absence of the inhabitants to pillage the houses. By good luck, no accident of this kind had occurred. The next day, the poor commandant, who had taken and given the alarm so unseasonably, was brought before the council of war. He had no bad intentions, but the law was formal. He was condemned to death, but his judges recommended him to the clemency of the emperor, who pardoned him. Chapter 17. Many of the brave fellows who composed the army of Bologna had merited the cross in the last campaigns. His Majesty desired this distribution to be a solemnity which should have immortal memories. He selected for it the day after his own birthday, August 16th, 1804. Nothing more beautiful was ever seen, nor could be seen, perhaps. At 6 o'clock in the morning, more than 80,000 men started from the four camps and advanced by divisions, drummers and musicians at the head, towards the level ground of the Ubert Mill, situated on the cliff beyond the right camp. In this plain, with its back turned towards the sea, a scaffolding some 15 feet high had been erected. It was ascended by 3 stairways, one in the middle and one at either side, all 3 covered by superb carpets. On this amphitheater of about 40 feet square were 3 platforms, the middle one supported by the imperial armchair, decorated with flags and trophies. The platform on the left was covered with seats for his brothers, the brothers of his emperor, and the great dignitaries. That on the right supported a tripod of antique shape, on which was a helmet, the helmet of Dugaslan, I think, filled with crosses and ribbons. Besides the tripod, a seat had been placed for the arch-chancellor. At about 300 feet from the throne, the ground rose in a gentle slope that was nearly round. It was on this slope that the troops arranged themselves in a half circle. On an eminence at the right of the throne were scattered 60 or 80 tents made of naval ensigns. They were for the ladies of the city, and they produced a charming effect. They were so far from the throne that those who occupied them were obliged to use lorgnettes. Between these tents and the throne is a part of the imperial guard on horseback, ranged in order of battle. The weather was magnificent. Not a cloud was in the sky. The English cruiser had disappeared, and nothing was in sight at sea but the line of broadside, superbly hung with flags. At 10 o'clock in the morning, a salvo of artillery announced the departure of the emperor. His Majesty started from his barracks, surrounded by more than 80 generals and 200 aides de camp. He was followed by his entire household. The emperor wore the uniform of a colonel general, foot guards, and came at a gallop to the foot of the throne amidst universal acclamation, the most frightful racket that could be made by drums, trumpets, and cannons, beating, sounding, and thundering together. His Majesty ascended the throne, followed by his brothers and some of the great dignitaries. When he was seated, everybody took his place, and a distribution of crosses began in the following manner. An aide-de-camp of the emperor called the designated soldiers, who came one by one, halted at the foot of the throne, saluted, and mounted the staircase on the right. They were received by the arch-chancellor, who gave them their brevet. 2 pages stationed between the tripod and the emperor took the decoration from the helmet of Dugaslan and handed it all to his Majesty, who had attached it himself to the hero's breast. As he did so, more than 800 drummers beat a roll, and when the decorated soldier came down from the throne by the staircase on the left, passing in front of the emperor's brilliant staff, fanfares executed by more than 1,200 musicians signalized the return of the legionary to his company. It is needless to say that the cry of "Long live the emperor" was repeated twice at each decoration. The distribution begun at 10 o'clock, terminated about 3. Then the aides-de-camp were seen passing through the divisions. A salvo of artillery was heard, and 80,000 men advanced in serried columns to within 25 or 30 feet of the throne. The most profound silence succeeded to the roll of the drums. And the emperor, having given his orders, the troops maneuvered for nearly an hour. Afterwards, each division defiled in front of the throne on the way back to camp, each chief lowering the point of his sword as he passed by. Prince Joseph, who had newly been made colonel of the 4th Regiment of the Line, was observed to salute his brother as he passed in a manner more graceful than military. The emperor repressed by a contraction of the eyebrows the somewhat critical remarks which his former companions seemed inclined to permit themselves on the subject. Save for this slight movement, his majesty's countenance had never been more radiant. At the moment when the troops were defiling, the wind, which had been blowing violently for 2 or 3 hours, became terrible. An orderly officer came running up to tell the emperor that 4 or 5 gunboats had run aground. The emperor once left the plane at a gallop, followed by several marshals, and went to station himself on the beach. The crew of the gunboats were saved, and the emperor returned to Pontabreek. This great army could not regain its cantonments before 8 in the evening the next day. The left camp gave a military fete at which the emperor was present. From morning, boats mounted on wheels went full sail through the streets of the camp, impelled by a favorable wind. Officers amused themselves by chasing them at a gallop and seldom caught up to them. These exercises lasted for an hour or 2, but the wind changing, the boats capsized amidst shouts of laughter. Next came a horse race. The prize was 1,200 francs. A lieutenant of dragoons, much esteemed in his company, asked the favor of competing, but the haughty council of superior officers refused to admit him on the pretext that his rank was not high enough, but in reality because he was considered a horseman of prodigious skill. Stung to the quick by this unjust refusal, the lieutenant of dragoons addressed himself to the emperor, who permitted him to run with the others after having made inquiries, the result of which apprised him that this brave officer was the sole support of a numerous family, and that his conduct was irreproachable. At a given signal, the rider started. The lieutenant was not slow in passing the others. He was about to touch the goal when, by an unlucky accident, a poodle dog stupidly ran between his horse legs and it fell. An aide-de-camp who was directly behind him was proclaimed victor. The lieutenant picked himself up as well as he could and was about to withdraw very disconsolately, yet somewhat consoled by the marks of interest displayed by the spectators, when the emperor had him called and said, "You deserve the prize, and you shall have it. I make you a captain." And turning to the grand marshal of the palace, "Have them pay 1,200 francs to Captain N." The name escapes me. And everybody began shouting, "Long live the emperor!" and congratulating the new captain on his fortunate fall. In the evening, there were fireworks that could be seen from the coast of England. 30,000 soldiers executed maneuvers with rockets in their muskets. These rockets rose to incredible height. The bouquet, which represented the arms of the empire, was so fine that during 5 minutes, Bologna, the surrounding country, and the whole coast was as bright as day. Some days after these fetes, as the emperor was passing from one camp to another, a sailor who was on the watch for him that he might present a petition found himself caught in a torrent of rain, and fearing that his paper might be spoiled, he sheltered himself behind an isolated barrack on the beach where ropes were kept. He had been waiting there a long time, drenched to the skin, when he saw the emperor coming down from the left camp at full gallop. Just as his majesty, still galloping, was about to pass the barrack, my brave sailor, who was lying in wait for him, sprang from his hiding place and threw himself in front of the emperor, holding out his petition in the attitude of a fencing master making a lunge. The emperor's horse sprang aside and came to a full stop. Frightened by this sudden apparition, His Majesty, astonished for a moment, cast a dissatisfied glance at the seaman and went on his way without taking the petition, which was presented in such a bizarre fashion. It was on that day, I think, that the Minister of the Navy, Mr. de Craye, had the ill luck to tumble into the water to the great amusement of His Majesty in order to permit His Majesty to go from the quay to a gunboat. A single plank had been thrown between the two. His Majesty passed, or rather jumped across this light bridge, and was received on board in the arms of a seaman of the guard. Mr. de Craye, much fatter and less nimble than the emperor, walked cautiously onto the plank, which it alarmed him to find bending beneath his feet. When he reached the middle, the weight of his body broke the plank, and the Minister of Marine fell into the water between the quay and the boat. His Majesty turned round at the noise made by Mr. de Craye in falling and bending over the side of the boat. "What?" said he. "It is our Mr. Marine who's fallen? How can it possibly be he?" And the emperor laughed so heartily while speaking thus. Meanwhile, 2 or 3 sailors were employed in getting Mr. de Craye out of his scrape. He was hoisted into the boat with a good deal of difficulty, as may be believed, the water pouring from his nose, mouth, and ears, and very much ashamed of his mishap, which the pleasantries of His Majesty made still more afflicting. Towards the end of our stay, the generals gave a grand ball to the ladies of the city. The ball was magnificent. The emperor was present at it. For this purpose, a hall had been constructed in carpentry and joiner's work. It was decorated in perfectly good taste with garlands, flags, and trophies. General Bertrand was appointed master of ceremonies by his colleagues, and General Buisson took charge of the buffet. This employment perfectly suited General Buisson, the greatest gastronomer in the camp, whose enormous paunch sometimes embarrassed him in marching. He required no less than 6 to 8 bottles with his dinner, which he never took alone, for it was a torment to him to not chatter while eating. He usually invited his aides-de-camp, whom doubtless through love of mischief he always selected from amongst the thinnest and frailest officers of the army. The buffet was worthy of him who had it in his charge. The orchestra was composed of the bands of 20 regiments, who played by turns. Only at the commencement of the ball they executed a triumphal march all together, while the aides-de-camp, dressed in the most gallant manner in the world, were receiving the ladies invited and giving them bouquets. To be admitted to this ball, it was necessary to have at least a rank of commandant. It is impossible to form an idea of the beauty of the sight presented by this multitude of uniforms, all vying with each other in brilliancy. The 50 or 60 generals who gave the ball had sent to Paris for costumes embroidered with inconceivable richness. The group which formed round His Majesty when he entered glittered with gold and diamonds. The emperor remained an hour at this entertainment and danced the boulangère with Madame Bertrand. He wore the uniform of a colonel general of the mounted guard. Madame la Maréchale Soult was the queen of the ball. She wore a black velvet robe strewn with those diamonds known as Rhine pebbles. In the middle of the night, a splendid supper was served, the preparations for which had been superintended by General Buisson. And to say that is to imply that nothing was lacking. The ladies of Bologna, who had never been present at anything of the sort before, were amazed. When supper time came, some of them took the notion of filling their reticules with sweets and dainties. I think they would like to have carried off the hall, the musicians and the dancers. For more than a month, the ball was the only subject of their conversation. At this epoch, or very near it, as His Majesty was promenading on horseback in the environs of his barrack, a pretty girl of 15 or 16, dressed in white and all in tears, threw herself on her knees in front of him. The emperor at once dismounted and ran to pick her up, asking kindly what he could do for her. The poor child had come to ask mercy for her father, a provision dealer condemned to the galleys for serious frauds. His Majesty could not resist such youth and charms. He pardoned him.